2013 Subaru XV Crosstrek left rear wheel bearing. I already replaced both rear wheel bearings in the winter. I don't have video of that because it was just too cold to be handling the camera and that at the same time. But the left rear has gone bad again. Sounds like it's growling. Defective part, and it's only been about 10,000 miles. So wanted to show you how it's done. I'm not going to have to go through the fighting to get it off because of the rust buildup, which is typical not only of pressed in bearings but also bolted in bearings. One of the things that we need to keep in mind when you tackle a project like this, not to do it guessing. I was able to find a useful PDF online for doing bearings and lug nuts and wheel nuts and stuff like that, that gives you the torque specifications. And before I get started, I want to show you this page, and I'll give you the link in the description below for this document. But it has all the torque specifications for most vehicles that are on the road these days, and should be pretty helpful. Now, this is the basic setup for most bolt-in wheel bearings, or we'll call it a wheel hub, and the axle shaft over here goes through everything else, and the wheel hub is clamped onto the axle shaft with the axle nut. The wheel hub itself is bolted into the knuckle using usually 3 or 4 hub mounting bolts. And the torque specifications are very specific on these, especially for the axle nut, because this wheel hub needs to have the bearings preloaded. If they're too loose, they'll wear out. If they're too tight, it can crack, and we don't want that to be happening. So you need to have a proper torque specifications and the proper torque wrenches in order to put this in so that you don't break anything. In this case, I found out if you scroll down further, it gives you torque specifications for hub mounting bolts, for the axle nut, and the lug nuts, which is all useful information as you're going forward on this project. Now, what I'm going to do on this car, I'm going to start with, this is the axle nut. This stake down portion here, I got to bang it out so that it can be removed. In behind, which is going to be difficult to see, and we'll show it afterwards after I get the you have to take this axle nut off, take off the rotor, take off the caliper, take off anything that can get in the way, such as this brake line mount. Remove the sensor. This is important if we end up having to bang it off because of the rust. The excessive banging can damage the sensor, so this is also a good idea to remove this and put everything out of the way so that nothing gets damaged. I'm going to partially disassemble this thing and I'll get back. Okay, I'm back a few minutes later. I took off the axle nut, took off the brake caliper, and also removed the wheel speed sensor from its slot there, just in case I have to do any banging. I'm not expecting to, because I'm going to show you what I did in the third part here. When you take off the caliper, make sure that you don't just let it hang off of the hose. You can kink the hose, you can break it internally. It causes some problems. So, if you have a place where you can tuck it, like, on top of the control arm or maybe on the spring. If not, I have these hooks that, you just hang it right off of the spring or off of something else, just so that there's no tension on that hose. Inside But you're going to be able to see. I'm gonna shine a light on it because I can't get at it from the other side with the camera, at least not with it lifted on the ground like this. Maybe if I had it in the air, it'd be easier to see. But if shine in, try and the bolt that we're looking for is there. And so you just kind of have to imagine from the diagram that we had that we're going to get that bolt from back here by the boot of the axle. And if you feel around, you'll be able to feel for it. Like right there, I can feel where there's the head of that bolt, and there's 4 of them. So we're going to get those removed and get on with the next step. I'm back. I have removed the 4 bolts. I got them all laid out over here. There's 4 bolts that happen to be on the back of this one that if you can see it now, there's some vacant space there and behind right there. That's where those there's one was there, another one there, another one there, another one there. So there's 4 bolts that hold this whole thing together. And if you're working on a vehicle that has been in use for some time, probably it is going to be rusted shut. And one of the problems is that rust takes up more material, more room than the original steel or iron did. So that means that anything that the rust is in between gets tight. This took no small amount of hammering and prying when I was originally doing this in the winter. And actually, yeah, you can see I've got still some wonderful coloration there where I smashed my finger with a hammer. And to get these pieces separated. Now this here, this is the brake back plate. This is the knuckle side here. This is the part that usually rusts. And then the bearing sits in it and sandwiches the backing plate in between. On these vehicles that have the brake system, this is a parking brake. Usually you don't have to remove any of the brake equipment. Usually is designed so that it'll just slide right out. Of course, that's after banging and everything. Now this one, what I did, and I'll show you in a minute, to try and make it easier on myself. You can see this just slides right out. I put anti-seize compound on the contact patch, like where these things are in contact with each other, to prevent rust from squeezing it shut. I also, after banging this thing off and finding it was just all full of rust, not really sure if it helped or not, I sanded everything down so that the new bearing would fit nice and easily into the back plate, so that there was no resistance putting it into the back plate. Same thing with this. I made sure that I test fit the bearing into the knuckle so that it wouldn't be tight. I sanded that all down to the bare metal, and I used a couple coats of rust converter primer just to see if it would prevent the rust. And honestly, I can't tell you if that was worth the time. Could have been. I mean, this is weird because this is like showing bare metal even though I painted it. Maybe it got stuck to the backing plate. I think any little thing that you can do to help would be to make your job easier in the future, or whoever works on it the next time. It's worth a thought. It only took a few extra minutes to paint it. But I mean, obviously you had to sand it and get rid of all the rust scale so that you could put it back together. Just so this wheel speed sensor, this slides down in here, and is on the opposite side is protected by this shield from dust entry, and it doesn't contact but makes close, is close to this embedded tone ring that is so that it can measure wheel speed for transmission function and for ABS and cruise control and electronic stability control, stuff like that. And all right, I am going to start putting this thing back together. Basically, once you've the hardest part of this whole deal is just the fact that it usually rusts, and rust in here on the inside surface of the knuckle, and it clamps down on the bearing. And so you're probably going to have to do some banging on it, some prying on it. Be careful not to, like I said, I removed the wheel speed sensor, because even banging on this, yeah, if you slip and you snap off the sensor, yeah, that's kind of obvious. But even banging on this can break the fine coil that's inside the wheel speed sensor. Same thing with the backing plate. Usually rusts on that inside edge, and it clamps down on the bearing, making it very difficult to remove. So again, this is where I put a coat of anti-seize, and hopefully for the future. I mean, this was 6 months ago that I replaced this, and it went bad. The other one on the other side is still perfectly fine, so we'll see what happens. All right, I'm going to get this thing back together. Well, we're down to the last step, which is to torque. Now I've installed the bearing, and I got the 4 bolts coming from the back side on either side of the axle shaft there. I torqued those already. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to fit the torque wrench in there. Torquing this, though, is important, and I've seen a couple of ways that people do it, and I have a problem with the way one of them, at least 3 ways. I mean, one, I've seen people run it on with the impact gun. Problem is, the impact gun is not accurate. You have no idea what kind of torque you're putting on it. And, so you risk under torquing or over torquing, which ultimately leads to ruining the bearing. The other way that I've seen people do it is to try and put the drum back on and set the parking brake. It's not really effective, because you have no idea if this drum is going to hold, and I'm not really sure if the drum is meant to hold that much torque. The other one where I've seen people put the wheel on without the center cap and then set the vehicle on the ground to keep the weight of the vehicle. The problem with that is when you set the weight of the vehicle down on this bearing untorqued, you risk damage to the bearing before you even gotten to start. So this is the best way to do it, using some kind of a reaction member. In this case, I'm using a long pry bar, and I'm down enough low enough to the ground so that I can do that. Sometimes if you're on a lift or something like that, you can put this against the lift arm, or even against the vehicle itself if it's close enough. Another thing, there is a special tool. If you're in the dealership, they use it, but using a bar like this helps out. So you set your torque wrench to whatever specification. In this case, it's 140 foot-pounds, and smoothly and easily pressing against it until it clicks, and then just keep going nice and easy. Don't bounce on it. That's it. Just one click. That's it. That sets your torque. And then when you're done, pull this out and use a hammer and a punch to push this ring down. That keeps it from coming. Doesn't keep it from coming loose. If it comes loose, it shouldn't back out. That's the purpose behind that. And that's it. Once you got that torqued and staked down, reassemble everything, put the drum back on, adjust it, put the caliper back on, put the sensor back on, and anything else that you removed, and then put the wheel back on and put it back down on the ground. You're all done. I hope that this was helpful, and please leave any comments, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Have a good day. Happy working.